All right, thank you all. Can you hear me okay? It's been a really wonderful visit. As usual, I think I've gained a few pounds of eating really excellent food in Guangzhou and Hong Kong. What I want to talk about today is some of the emerging technology that was mentioned by the previous speakers. It's a bit of a USA centric presentation, but I want to also comment as I go through some of the things I've learned from being at this conference about the similar activities that are happening in both Hong Kong and also in the rest of China. This is the type of technology that we might call traditional monitoring or conventional monitoring or the gold standard. These are technologies that are used in regulatory networks in Hong Kong, also throughout the United States. They require a lot of effort and a lot of training and cost to deploy. And this is what's needed to have extremely accurate data that's used to compare against air quality standards. But because of the level of difficulty in doing this kind of monitoring, there's a limited number of locations in any geographic area. So in a major city in the United States, or an area like where I live, where there's multiple smaller cities, there may only be a few locations with monitoring sites. And so what are some of the missing areas for observation? And some were also mentioned by previous speakers. Some gaps might be measuring in areas with limited infrastructure or under special situations, like in the United States, we've had a lot of wildfires recently. And so areas that may have smoke but may not have any nearby monitoring stations. Also, we see applications of new technologies to measure near source fence lines and may be able to detect leaks and have more quick repairs, and maybe cost saving for the industry and also support public health. We also see the micro-environmental or neighborhood scale type monitoring that Chris just talked about, as well as personal exposure in indoor type environments. So we've been calling this emerging technology, but I think of it as emerged technology. It's here. It's moving really quickly. And it's moving even faster, I think, in China than in the United States. And I didn't think anywhere was moving faster than what's happening in the United States. In the past, most of the people who've conducted air monitoring have been specialists in the government or in academia. There's a growing diversity of people that are building and putting out air monitoring technologies. A couple examples in the United States, state air monitoring agencies, which usually conduct regulatory type monitoring. Here's an example from a state in the United States that is putting out low-cost sensors in a number of locations. And I'll show what these technologies are in a moment. And here's one example here in this picture, a very small little device. This is a major weather forecasting company called Weather Underground. They have partnered with a small startup in California that sells a $200 PM2.5 sensor that has integrated cellular communication. You turn it on, plug it in, it's reporting PM2.5 concentrations at that location. And they're relying on citizen scientists. They have 200,000 sites in the entire world, and they are marketing that they want citizen scientists to buy this technology, put it in their backyard, and contribute their data to the network. Here's another example of a different type of monitoring. So Google has partnered with a startup in Silicon Valley to add air monitoring instruments to street view cars. They're currently using very high-cost research-grade technology, but they are looking at being able to scale up with lower-cost technologies. And this is allowing them to drive around and map air quality in real time throughout cities. And they're mostly doing this in California right now. So some of the issues is that this is an exponential increase in air quality data, but also there's a lot of questions about the quality of the data, what you can do with this data, and how reliable is it, and also how do we interpret it and communicate about it. So I'll talk a little bit about those topics. Here's the Google Street View car again. So some of the complexity with the mobile type platforms is you can have spatial coverage down to just tens of meters. So I think the example Alexis showed was showing very localized type concentration hotspots with this type of monitoring. However, it's temporarily measured in that location, then they move on to another location. So what do you do with this complicated data that's changing with both time and space? And then it's gotten even a little bit more complicated with the lower cost sensors. So you're seeing here some of these low cost sensor packages. She's wearing one here in this site, and here's one on an armband. So these are very miniaturized air monitoring technologies. The price tag is significantly reduced, and there's some sacrifices made in the measurement quality. And they're making it able to use in all types of mobile platforms. So now you have sort of more complex data, but also lower cost technologies. Here is a network that I showed. This is the group that's partnering with Weather Underground, and this is the current network that I pulled up on the web just a couple days ago. I thought this was an impressive number of sensor sites that are reporting data in the United States until I heard a presenter from Beijing saying that there's 30,000 sensor sites in China. You know, this is probably in the order of close to 1,000. And so I will be following up with him to learn more about what is happening in China. But what I understand is that there is a number of cities that are implementing sensor networks throughout China. The data is managed at a municipality level, but it's very similar in nature. There's a lot of the same measurement components that are being used in those technologies are the same ones that we're using in the United States and that we're seeing being developed in the US. I'm showing an example here of the comparison between the data and a reference monitor that was done in California. And some of these values are close to 1, which is almost perfect agreement. My colleagues at EPA gave me a hard time about this because through our testing, we know that many, many technologies do not perform with this level of quality. So I could have spent 10 minutes showing you a lot of examples of poor performance. But one thing I always want to make sure people realize is this testing was conducted under fairly clean air quality conditions in the United States for a short period of time. And so one thing we see is really needed is similar type of testing of the same technologies in other atmospheres with different concentration ranges and also different types of environmental conditions, temperature and humidity. And we're very happy to see that some of this work is going on in Beijing. And there's also some great work happening here in Hong Kong with both CityU and UST and other universities. This is another quickly moving area of technology of sensors being sold as consumer products. So Chris talked about if there were sensors in this room or in your home or in your car. These are technologies you currently can buy. Some of these are designed for wearable use. This is actually the sensor right here. This is like a brooch you could wear. And it would sync with an app and show you your concentrations in real time. And you can see most of these devices, because they're for consumers, are also providing some kind of interpretation of the values in real time. So here is a popular device, I think, in China, the laser egg. It's reporting a index type value and a color. Here's one that's showing a color changing on a pretty fast time basis with the levels going up and down. And here's a device saying it's clean right now. So some of the complexities is these devices, some of them are incorporating measurements we don't usually put into air quality indices like carbon dioxide or total VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And so it's one challenge that the EPA is having is how do we harmonize how the government communicates air quality conditions with some of these new technologies, and what guidance can we give to technology developers? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So some of the activities that we're doing at EPA, we are trying to keep up with this very quickly moving market. We do our own research studies, and so in some cases we're developing some custom technologies, and also there's some really impressive work happening here in Hong Kong with development of custom sensor systems for research studies. We're also trying to do work on what do you do with the data from these types of technologies, how do you process it, how do you visualize it, and also one that is maybe nearest and dearest to EPA is how do you communicate and interpret this data. So this is an example of what a co-location might look like. We have a device, we jokingly call this a chicken coop, where we put sensors inside. It's really just protecting them from the weather, and we try to systematically test different technologies on the market by buying at least 3 of them, testing them for about a month up to 9 months against a regulatory monitor and see how they compare and put that data out. And I'll show a link at the end. So we're trying to systematically keep testing technologies. There's also a group in California, the air quality, the AQ-SPEC program that's done by the South Coast Air Quality Monitoring District that is also doing systematic testing. But there's not a lot of this type of testing happening in the world. And so we see the need for more of this in having more environments where technologies are tested. This is an example showing less good performance results. So this was a device that was performing pretty well in comparison, but then when the humidity became high, the concentration started deviating quite a bit from the earlier relationship they had. So this is an example of the type of what we refer to as measurement artifacts, where something beyond the pollutant is causing the sensor signal to change. And so this sensor was reporting false high concentrations during this period of time. And we see this also with gas sensors that may have measurement artifacts with humidity, or they may react to a different pollutant than what they're reportedly sensing. So there's a lot of complexities with some of these technologies and ensuring that the values are really true, reliable values. This is some of the custom technologies we've developed in our research studies in the United States for a variety of applications. And the primary measurements that we've been able to make in this more miniaturized type of measurement platforms have been PM2.5, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, as well as NO, volatile organic compounds, only total, as well as black carbon. You know, some of the ones we see missing on this list are specific species, like specific air toxics. So there's a lot of interest in the United States of measuring specific air toxics, but sensors are not available right now for that. Another one we have missing from this list is SO2, that at least under clean conditions in the United States, we have not been able to have successful SO2 comparisons. We also are trying to stimulate the market to develop specific integrated packages for applications where we don't see the technology existing. And one we are advertising is a sensor prototype along with other US federal organizations to develop a system that could be used in emergency response during wildland fire smoke events. So we're looking for a system that could be very easily deployed, immediately be transmitting data, and also work under really high and dynamic pollution conditions. I won't go into detail on this, but we also are funding a lot of grants throughout the United States to look at how these technologies can be used for specific applications where they are also communicating the data to community members and working with community members to use these technologies. Some of the most different projects here, this one in Hawaii, is applying sensors to look at volcanic eruption smog events. And then this one up here in Washington is working with Native American tribal groups looking at wood burning exposure. And then also in other cities in the United States, looking at more urban type community exposure to air pollution and working with community members on both the design of monitoring and also how the data is shared with them and how it's interpreted. We're also trying to work on the QA side, and these technologies can measure data as fast as a second-by-second measurement. And if you're putting that data to the public in real time, what are your means of quality assuring that data on that very fast time basis? So this is now requiring maybe the development of new algorithms. So one of our systems is pushing the data to the web. And so we've had to come up with a number of on-the-fly QA checks to feel comfortable with that data going public. And also developing new ways to visualize complicated data that may be mobile in nature and changing in time and space, and overcoming technical barriers for groups like citizen scientists who want to use these technologies, but may only have something like Microsoft Excel to analyze the data. And so for them to be able to actually see their data and explore it, they need some new data analysis platforms. And then finally, this is more looking at the connection between sensors and identifying sources. And so we see, there's some, if you combine, this is a concentration field developed by combining measurements and wind collected very fast and together and being able to detect, in this case, were 3 different major sources: a rail yard, a airport, and a power plant were causing these concentration patterns. And then here is a fence line monitoring system that could be, that we're doing tests right now with industry partners in the United States to test this system out for leak detection. So some of the big challenges coming up, we see a lot of challenges on the data front and on how we assimilate this data and how networks of sensors are managed. We have a new project that we're starting at EPA called Big Data on Microenvironmental Air Pollution, or BIGMAP, where we're working between the measurement researchers and the modelers to try to see how do we assimilate this data, what are the best practices, and what lessons can we learn, and trying to combine sensor data, regulatory data, satellite data, and multiple different types of models. So I'm going to jump ahead because of the remaining time. This is some of our work trying to develop maybe an alternative metric for how sensor data may be communicated that's different than the AQI. So trying to provide some alternatives for sensor developers that may allow you to harmonize between the government-produced AQI that's on a different spatial and time scale with very personalized type data. And this is the last thing I want to make this group aware of that's significant, more legal issues in the US or events in the US. One is that there's a proposed bill right now in Congress that is actually proposing to amend the Clean Air Act that would allow the introduction of air quality sensors in the regulatory process. And so this is right now just a proposed bill. It's not passed, and there probably will be a lot of changes to it in the process, but this is something that has the EPA administrator's attention and has a lot of EPA staff attention as well. And then also, this is actually a passed law in California, AB 617. So this is a state-level law that's requiring the deployment of community air monitoring systems at hotspot type environments. And they have some supporting reports that are suggesting air sensor technologies be used for this type of monitoring. And these air monitoring systems will have to be put in place by July 1, 2019. And I'll stop here. These are the links that may be useful if you are interested in some of the research results and performance testing results. Thank you very much.